Probably one of the reasons why you follow my channel is because I talk a lot about leverage ETFs. But in this video, I'm going to give you two types of leverage ETFs that I will never touch. And why I will not touch these ETFs? Because of volatility, okay? Because when you invest in leverage ETFs, you are trying to maximize your returns over time. But if an asset has too much volatility, when you introduce leverage, that volatility will absolutely kill your returns. If you want to get geeky about this, I share in my community, the Heroic Wealth Academy, I share the Kelly Criterion Indicator, Kelly Criterion Curve, which is an indicator that I'm going to share with you in this video that tells you the optimal leverage to maximize your returns over time. And there is, for every asset, a sweet spot of leverage that you can use. And beyond that leverage, you will lose money. And for many assets, the optimal leverage is actually 1x. So don't use leverage, okay? And the first type of leverage ETFs that I will not touch, except some rare exceptions, are single stock leverage ETFs. Single stock leverage ETFs, most of them are too volatile. So why is that? Okay, let's jump here on the chart. So what you see here on the chart is I plugged the S&P 500, SPX, and you have here my Kelly indicator. And as you can see here, it says that Kelly optimal for the S&P 500, this is 10 years of data, will be 3.85. Of course, you should not go full Kelly. So if you invest with 3x or 2x leverage in the S&P 500, you will get those very nice returns because the S&P 500 is not too volatile. So if you introduce some leverage, that volatility will not eat up your returns, will not decay your returns. People often talk about volatility decay. Another asset where I like to add some leverage is the Nasdaq 100. Nasdaq 100 is a little bit more volatile than the S&P 500, but still have here Kelly optimal 3.7. So if you use a leverage ETF on the S&P 500 that is 2x leverage, such as QLD, or triple X leverage, such as the TQQQ, you are still good over the very long term, okay? For the S&P 500, I usually use SSO for 2x leverage or UPRO for 3x leverage. So when you invest in index leverage ETFs, you are okay most of the times because indices are already very diversified. S&P 500 is 500 companies, okay? So it adds more variance and less volatility to leverage ETFs, and that's why we can leverage some indices, such as the S&P 500 and Nasdaq. What about individual stocks? Okay, individual stocks, as I'm going to show you here, it gets pretty volatile. So some of the most used leverage ETFs for individual stocks are, for example, the Tesla leverage ETF. But when I add Tesla to the chart, it tells me that the Kelly optimal for Tesla is 0.94. So it's basically 1x. And if you invest with any leverage on Tesla, even 1.5, 2x or 3x, you'll just lose money because volatility, you have this volatility decay that will eat up your returns. You will have more volatility than returns. So don't do leverage in a stock such as Tesla. I can give you more examples. For example, I love Palantir. I own Palantir, but it's not leveraged because when I add here Palantir, it basically, the indicator doesn't even work because it's basically telling me not to use any leverage on Palantir. Another stock that people have been using lots of leverage is Strategy. And applying leverage to a stock such as Strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, would also be an absolute disaster. Finally, I want to share with you another company, Marvel. So Marvel, for example, have been performing very, very, very well, right? Look at this chart. Just look at this beauty. So for like 1 year, a little bit over a year, it went up almost 400%, 369%. But still, my Kelly leverage indicator tells me that the optimal leverage will be 1.3x, and you should not go all the way to the optimal, you should use less, so probably should not use leverage at all on Marvel, despite the fact that this stock went up. And why? Because an asset might go up, but if you have too much volatility, it will still not be good for your portfolio. Okay, so now with that out of the way, I have tons of students that ask me about single stock leverage ETFs. I tell most of the times, stay away from single stock leverage ETFs. But I do have one single stock leverage ETF in my portfolio. So am I contradicting myself? Not really. Let's jump here again on the chart. And the ETF that I have part of my leverage ETF portfolio that is a single stock is Berkshire Hathaway. And why I have Berkshire Hathaway? Because as you can see here, Berkshire Hathaway has been historically very low volatility stock. It's a very low volatility stock because in fact, Berkshire Hathaway is more like a holding company. They hold positions in many other companies. It's almost like an ETF managed by very smart people. It used to be managed by Warren Buffett. And as you can see here, my Kelly Optimal says it can go up to 3.7. At the moment, I'm doing 2x leverage on Berkshire Hathaway using a leverage ETF called BRKU. Okay, what's the other type of ETF that I absolutely hate to use? I never touch this kind of ETF. And when anyone asks me about it, I said, oh, please, 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 don't do this kind of ETF. And I'm talking about inverse ETFs. Inverse ETFs, some of them are leveraged, and basically they go straight to zero. These inverse ETFs are also often called short ETFs. Basically, you are shorting the market. But the thing is that to short the market, you need to have very, very high degree of accuracy. And no one can really predict what's going to happen. So I'll stay away of inverse ETFs and short ETFs. Let's jump here on the chart. As you can see here, the SQQQ, which is the inverse ETF for the QQQ, for Nasdaq, over the last 10 years lost 99.98% of its value. 99.98%. Why would anyone in the world invest in an ETF that over the last 10 years lost 99.9% of its value? It's absolutely crazy. So please stay away of these ETFs because unless you have a crystal ball and you know that the market is going to crash tomorrow, inverse ETFs should not be part of a portfolio, really. So the takeaway of this video is, number one, single stock leverage ETFs are usually too volatile to invest in. Most of them will lose money due to volatility decay. Volatility decay is okay as long as you don't have too much volatility. And not having too much volatility depends on whether you are investing in indices, such as the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, or individual stocks. I will stay away from single stock leverage ETFs unless you are investing in a stock with very, very low volatility, which is the case of Berkshire Hathaway. And number two, inverse ETFs. Most of the times, they're a disaster. Not most of the time, it's like 99% of the time they are a disaster because most of the time the market is going up, not going down. So stay away from those ETFs. All right, guys, I talk about leverage ETFs all the time in my community in the Henry Wealth Academy. I have a 4.5-hour course about leverage ETFs. I have a stock market course, and I talk about ETFs every single week about my strategies that allowed me to retire in Hong Kong, and also that allowed me my portfolio over the last 1 year, my leverage ETF portfolio returned 60%. Not bad, right, for one single year. And over the last 5 years, I always doubled the S&P 500. Anyway, check the community, 7-day free trial, you can cancel anytime. And if you have invested in any leverage ETFs, let me know in the comments what kind of leverage ETFs do you like. All right, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.